Greetings, folks. Another episode of Maroon Getaway, life examined by an aspiring 21st century Maroon. Here's another way to look at our dilemma. The fossil fuel industrial age represents an unprecedented growth phase in a grand, historic, adaptive cycle. We have seen growth phases before, as ancient empires expanded, but such booms always led to periods of consolidation, the conservation phase, and collapse or release, in which population declines and cultural achievements were lost. It could be argued that the last few decades have represented a global conservation phase, as the world has enjoyed a period of relative peace and stability, with rates of growth in population and GDP, or gross domestic product, beginning to slow. Meanwhile, we are confronted with a paradox on one hand, since there is now more to go around in terms of energy and wealth. So that thing, again, is another interesting point. So there's a lot to share. What's yet to be determined is whether or not, even though there is a lot to share, is there a willingness to share? So this begins to get into a discussion that goes beyond simply talking about the mechanics or the functional aspects of what sort of the mechanism will permit or enable. It's whether or not, even if you have the ability, is there a willingness to actually use that ability in a particular way? During the 20th century, the domesticated quote-unquote classes, i.e. workers, in industrial societies gained access to unprecedented benefits, including education, healthcare, improved housing conditions, cheap and rapid transportation, and entertainment. Now, that last point, entertainment, is going to be an important factor that I think we're going to need to break down, because functionally we have to ask, what is the role that entertainment plays in the maintenance of everything that's being talked about here? Life in liberal democracies implies universal access to certain social services, freedom of speech, and social mobility. But on the other hand, the prey classes are often predated upon, quote unquote, in more subtle ways, often having to do with debt. So again, this was mentioned in the previous episode. Interest-bearing debt is nothing new. It has a 5,000-year history. And for millennia, debt and interest have served as tools for the owning classes to predate, quote unquote, upon borrower classes. The rapid growth of energy supplies during the 20th century implied the possibility of a rapid growth in money supplies. Since energy is required for all work, whether done by humans or machines, more available energy meant more work could be done, and thus more money could be generated by work or used to pay for work. So again, this energy relationship, right? Either you have the physical capacity to do the work, and then once you have the physical capacity to do the work, how do you gain access to it? So in this particular instance, that often is going to come in the form of money. Do you have the money, or do you have wealth that allows for you to gain access to the products or the services that are generated from the work that's done? Now, what's important also to discuss here, and this is talked about a lot at present, debt is money. Right. So one of the reasons why there is a tolerance for debt these days is it still sort of constitutes a type of currency that enables work to be done, which I think may for many people seem counterintuitive, but this is the world that we live in. This is what's happened. During the 20th century, the link between money and precious metals, which were inherently limited in quantity, was gradually severed, and money was instead linked to debt. The making of a bank loan calls the money into existence. Hence, nearly all money is now tied to interest-bearing debt, with the ever-growing stream of interest flowing to the financial sector. As economist Michael Hudson explains, the financial system has become the primary means of enslavement and plunder in the modern world. I think what's interesting is, and again, this gets into discussion outside of talking about the mechanics of the system. This is one of the reasons why you'll find in certain religious traditions, the Abrahamic faiths being in particular, if you look at Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, interest or usury, it was prohibited, because what it effectively is enslavement. It's among the worst kinds of the worst varieties of oppression. And again, in Islam, usury, both the participation in usury is tantamount to declaring war with God. So it's a very kind of odious moral infraction. But debt itself eventually becomes a limit to growth. Following the Great Depression of the 1930s, economist Irving Fisher developed the theory of debt deflation, which holds that as debt levels rise to the point at which repayment becomes impossible, a moment arrives when large numbers of people default on their loans and mortgages, causing banks to fail and economies to implode. In present circumstances, soaring debt levels temporarily mask rising systemic problems that could undermine the wealth generation system supporting modern industrial societies. And we've seen, again, examples of this, the crash of 1929, and Black Friday in 1987, and then, most recently, the market crash in 2008. Modern societies run on oil, which powers most ways of transporting food, raw materials, manufactured goods, and people. As high-quality, easily accessed oil deposits deplete, a greater percentage of overall world petroleum supply comes from marginal sources, such as U.S. tight oil, which is produced by hydrofracturing, or what is more popularly known as fracking, and horizontal drilling. However, such production is unprofitable with oil prices at affordable levels, and the companies specializing in extracting these resources are therefore deeply in debt. In effect, debt is acting as an energy extender, and again, this point can't be underestimated. The fact that it's functionally speaking, that debt extends the ability to do work. That's important to understand and appreciate. And I think this is one of the reasons why, when you look at what's the impact, what are the implications for the willingness to tolerate this kind of thing. One of the stories that came to mind, it was a story that appeared in the UK Guardian maybe about a year or two ago, about the amount of subsidies that are provided to the fossil fuel industry. So here, again, this is from an article dated the 7th of August, 2017. Fossil fuel subsidies are a staggering $5 trillion per year. A new study finds 6.5% of global GDP goes to subsidizing fossil fuel. So I think it's just interesting that there is a willingness to dedicate government funds that are provided by taxes to this particular industry, as opposed to dedicating those financial resources to something else that might have more broad benefit, kind of distributed to people who don't have access to the same levels of government largesse, I'll say. There is a willingness, there is a very conscious decision made to give this money to some people and not to others. And it seems like the people that these funds or this support is provided to are not necessarily the ones that actually need it the most. They sort of already have access to quite a lot of wealth and resources. But this particular industry, because all of the systems that have been constructed within sort of the industrial world that we now live in, is completely reliant on having access to these fuels. So there is basically an understanding that if this is allowed to fall apart, the effect that this has on other systems that are a part of this sort of industrial world that we now live within, all of those things are in jeopardy. In effect, debt is acting as an energy extender, enabling the current conservation phase of the grand adaptive cycle to continue, but only until the moment when debt deflation arrives, right? So eventually there's going to become a point when all of the debt that's been built up, it comes crashing down. And we've already seen how this happens periodically. Other characteristic symptoms of a societal conservation phase arguably include increasing wealth inequality, a decline in growth of workers' wages, and declining economic prospects for younger generations. Again, the old eating the young. While these now appear to be gradual trends, when the release phase arrives, it could do so with a vengeance.